Hello all, and welcome back to a new episode of TV and Us, a conversation show about the TV series we just can't stop talking about. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And each season we focus on a different show, reviewing it episode by episode, and we invite you to watch along with us. Right now we are reviewing Dune Prophecy, and today we're in episode 2, titled Two Wolves. If you haven't watched it yet, this is your spoiler alert. Please check it out before continuing to listen to the rest of our conversation. Okay, Sarah, start us off with a summary of the episode.
So in IMDb, there are 2 summary options. And the shorter of the 2 is essentially the same as the show summary.
Oh.
So I will be using the longer one, but I just think that that's funny.
No sense, but all right.
Yeah, we have one episode summary that really isn't an episode summary. It's fine. We're fine. Okay, here we go. After receiving word about events on Seleucia Secundus, Valia brings Theodosia to the Imperial House to help manage the situation. Meanwhile, Desmond makes a confession to Emperor Carino. Tula reluctantly enlists Lila for a vital mission, and distrust swirls around Kieran Atreides, the swordmaster for House Carino.
So many things are happening.
So many! That's so many names. That's so many plot lines.
Yeah.
Holy moly.
Yeah. There's a lot of names that I did not catch nor remember from the first episode, and only reading about the episode afterwards of like, this person brought this person here. I was like, oh, that's that person's name. I know the face. I know roughly who they are. Did not know the name. Theodosia's one of them. I was like, oh, okay. Now I know your name. This is very good.
Yeah, I need name tags.
Yes,
really.
Please.
Like, especially in the first episode, like if everyone can just wear a name tag, hello, my name is Theodosia, that would be very helpful for me.
Yeah. Not me reading that and immediately thinking about the Hamilton song, Dear Theodosia.
I was singing that the entire time I was watching this episode. Anytime anybody says her name, bam, I was in Hamilton.
I love it. I love it. Okay. Well, my goodness, much to discuss. But before we get to that, let's share episode titles for this one. What is yours?
A Circus of Fear and Rumor.
Oh, yes. I love it. That is a great tagline for this episode and the show in general so far. Yeah, good stuff. My episode title is Beautiful Terrible Things.
Yes. There are some beautiful, terrible things in this episode, for sure.
Okay, well, let's dive in. So much happened over the course of 1 hour. Lots of juicy subplots, side plots, betrayals, reveals. Where should we begin? Maybe what's the biggest one that stands out to you? I mean, it's hard to choose any one of them, but what's the first one that comes to mind?
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things in this episode to me is that Dorothea takes Lila out somehow from, like, beyond the grave.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what? How?
Her mother.
How did this happen? So I find that really interesting. And I think that that's something that this show is doing very well, is that we're seeing, like, kind of the boundaries of what's possible. And Valia and Tula know one way and have experienced a lot of, their powers and what they can do and all of that. But we're seeing through Desmond and then through Dorothea, I guess, these other things that Valia and Tula maybe aren't aware of and don't know how it works. And so their frame of reference for this world and their power in this world is now being threatened by things that they don't understand. And I think that that's really interesting, and I'm curious to see how the show is going to explore those things a little bit more.
Yeah, because so much of their decision-making is based on the facts that they know. And seemingly they know a lot, which is one of the things that stood out to me. I'll get to that in a second. But you're right, for that moment, the boundaries of what is possible being stretched beyond their scope of understanding makes it really fun, because then we get to see them finally, tremble in their boots. And I think one of the moments that I love that's kind of along this vein is getting to see Valia speechless at the end of the episode, realizing that there is a power beyond hers. And for someone who has been arguably one of the most powerful players in the entire Dune universe up until this point, and no one has been able to undermine her, to see her humbled quickly in that way, in that moment, is really fascinating for the characters too. So I think that'll be really fun. We're potentially going to get to see Valia stretched and the pressure's on for her, and then also Tula as well being stretched emotionally with what's happening with Lila, who is kind of her stand-in daughter. So I think there's going to be some really fun character moments for especially the two of them in the next episode as they are reeling from the events of this one.
I'm especially interested because they both lost something at the end of this episode in a way. Obviously, Tula losing Lila. I don't know if she's dead or just severely injured or what's going on with her. But anyway, Tula has experienced loss with her and with that relationship. And then Valia has maybe lost some confidence in herself, and she's lost some power. And that's not something that she's used to or probably something that she's encountered before. And I love that we saw in the first episode that she uses the voice and has the exact same commands for Dorothea in the first episode, and Dorothea isn't a match for her. And then Valia does the exact same thing when she's pushed in this second episode. And I just find that interesting, that even though it's been 30 years, she still relies on the same tools to try and take out her foes. So I think it does play into that idea that she has just been so dominant and so powerful for these past 30 years that she hasn't had to find other ways to kind of bend people to her will. She's been able to do it through manipulation and all of those kind of covert things that she does. And this is her one overt trick. And it doesn't work on Desmond. So I think that that's going to be really interesting. He strikes me as just a complete agent of chaos in regards to her plans. And I'm very excited to see the extent of his abilities and how he uses those things to just mess with Valia. I think that's going to be fascinating to see.
It's going to be so fun. Because he clearly knows how to push her buttons, It's kind of like seeing siblings argue, just they know how to get at each other. And that smug satisfaction that he has on his face by the end of this episode. And even the line that he says, which I think is so notable, when he says it's not that no one will hear you, it's that they'll hear you and just won't care. And there's kind of two layers of meanings, it feels to that. There's obviously the initial layer of they're hearing your command to take themselves out and they just won't, and they will resist at that tactical, physical level. But, the emotional depths of that statement, I think also are part of what is really digging deep into the maybe soft spots of Valia that are wounded from her past in some way. So that feeling of being not heard and not seen and that undermining her power, I think will be fascinating to see how she kind of unravels because of that. So I thought that the line that he says worked on so many levels, and he seems to really know her soft spots, which is fascinating because he doesn't technically know each other. Maybe he does from some weird force mind thing or whatnot, but he seems to have known how to really get at the core parts of her.
Which is super interesting because that's what Valia does. That is her biggest skill set, is being able to read people like that. And so then she can bend them and manipulate them and get them to do her will. And so it's just fascinating to see this foe that seems to be pretty evenly matched to her and have a similar skill set in that ability to read somebody. And I think that the the bit about Kasha really makes Desmond interesting because she was on another planet. Like, how was he able to do what he did, not only in like the like reading of her and his judgment of her, but also in how he burned her alive. So I think that adds a complexity to it too, that even Valia doesn't understand how he was able to do that. So whatever his sandworm force powers are, these are something new that we haven't seen before. So that the fact that he is so skilled in using them and they are new and nobody really knows what to do with them makes for some really interesting dynamics between those two.
Yeah, and it's really great the way that the show built up those details from not just Valia, but many other characters who also seem to like not believe that that is physically possible to kill one person, to kill two people in different locations from one person. There's that whole scene with Emperor Jafiko as well, where he says the same thing of like, are you telling me that he could have been the one to kill both of them? Like, nah, that's not possible, you know? And so like it is breaking everybody's understanding of how this world can work and what those boundaries are.
We're just pushing buttons and pushing boundaries.
That he is. He's so interesting. I think he continues to be one of the most fascinating, mysterious characters. And I love that the show is not giving us too much of him all at once, you know? One of the pieces that I thought was really fun in this episode and going to be really fun to watch, this is getting a little bit into my looking ahead section, is that for right now, Desmond seems to be loyal in the service of the Imperium. And it just feels like that's a ticking time bomb. You know, like someone with the greatness of the powers that he's been given are not going to stay obedient and subservient to someone like the Emperor for very long. And so that seemingly very symbiotic, great relationship that they have now, I'm excited to see that unravel and how it's going to happen, what inspires that relationship to break. Or maybe their goals are aligned for a while until they aren't anymore. And so I think that'll be fascinating to see. But it's very much teed up and it feels like a very unbalanced relationship right now. And so I think we'll continue to see that relationship tip to the point where it's no longer sustainable.
Yeah, I am really ready for some Agent of Chaos business. You know, he's already messed with Valia pretty successfully, but I'm ready for him to mess with the Imperium too, because I don't know, man. He's a character that you don't trust, but is so entertaining that you want him to keep going. So do what you're going to do, Desmond. Let's create some chaos here.
Yes, absolutely. And this is another aspect that I'm really appreciating out of the show so far, is that we're kind of not rooting very comfortably and loyally on one side or the other. You know, I feel like we've gotten to see a lot of the corruption and power hangriness of the Ben Gesserit and the Sisterhood and some of like Valia's methods. And so, you know, theoretically, I would be rooting for the Ben Gesserit, but in a way, Desmond's cause and his mission from his perspective being, y'all have been running the show for centuries. It's time for a new regime to come in and take you down. I'm like, well, you know, they are calling literally every shot, pulling every puppet string in the entire forces of the great houses, but also even the rebel forces as well, that you're like, you know, the transfer of power over to someone new might not be so bad for the Ben Gesserit, who are really kind of under essentially the dictatorship of Valia and her being the final say. And so I kind of love that the show isn't just cleanly, we're rooting for the Ben Gesserit because there are, you know, very clear protagonists and heroes. We have a complicated relationship with them as well. And so like I felt my loyalties constantly changing and shifting. I think every side is like corrupt and just out for their own gain, as Princess Inez has said. Like everyone's just looking to gain more and more power with the methods and pieces that they have. But I kind of love that the show hasn't perfectly positioned us as a viewer to be loyal in one direction. I think that makes it a lot more interesting.
And I really love that detail of them manipulating both the great houses and the rebellion. I
Yes.
think that is
Genius.
brilliant.
Mhm.
And like you said, that makes it more interesting because I feel like a lot of times, you know, when I'm watching a show, I'm going to be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna side with the rebellion, you know, that's fighting the empire. Like, that's great. But we see that Ben Gesserit is manipulating both of them. And that is so smart from a strategic perspective, because then they can just be bending everybody to their will. But I think that makes all of these relationships even more complicated and way more interesting. And I think gives the show a lot more room to play with, you know, and it's a way for Valia to try and prevent surprises from happening too. Because if you're controlling the great houses and you're controlling the rebellion, you have everybody handled. And again, I think that it just shows that for so long, she has been so dominant. She's been so in control. Nothing has escaped her purview. And now here is Desmond about to blow it all up. And so that detail of them manipulating the rebellion, I think just shows just how shocking Desmond is and how much he is going to absolutely rock her world. And she is not ready for it.
Mm-hmm. And I think the show's tapping into our kind of natural instincts to feel that discomfort with one group amassing that much power. You know, like the minute that there's that reveal around her handling and doing all her political maneuvering with the rebellion in order to keep the great houses weak enough to need her, then we're like, well, you've got every game piece on the board in your pocket. And that's just too much power because now you're just playing God, really, in this universe. And so Desmond is clearly corrupt and ruthless in a lot of ways, but he's kind of this giant, fat game piece that's been slapped on the board. And we're kind of like, all right, let's see this whole thing unravel and get toppled over. And I think that's really fun because we'll get to see how every character is going to react, change sides, move in different directions that might be beneficial for them as the whole thing gets kind of blown up. It's very much similar in vibe to episode 3 of Succession season 4, where like Logan dies and then all of a sudden like the whole game board is now shuffled, reset, and everybody's reshifting all of their goals, intentions, alliances. And that level of reset, I think, is going to be really fun and exciting to see.
And what's fascinating about that happening in Dune Prophecy is we don't get to know the before times. The show begins with the chaos agent being introduced to the board, you know? So we didn't have the time to like spend with the characters and get to know all of them in their equilibrium. So the show is having to show us both like subtly and in a more obvious way how things operate and the normal order of things. And then in these little snippets showing us how Desmond is really shaking things up. And I'm curious if the frequency and the magnitude of his shakeups is going to increase as we go along, because now we have a much better sense of who these characters are, kind of their relationships to one another. So now that foundation is laid, are we going to see him just, I guess, wreaking havoc in Valia's life more and more frequently? How is that going to look? And does he have any other tricks up his sleeve too? Because we've seen him do the like burning people thing a few times now, and now we know that the voice doesn't work on him. So we've seen a couple of little things, but just how much power does he actually have? And then how is he going to strategically use it against Valia to shake things up?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the other interesting thing that I think is introduced in this episode too is all of the secrets that Valia and Tula and Kasha were hiding. And Lila being potentially a key source to that information coming out. So even internally for the sisterhood, there's a lot of potential for chaos and division and disillusionment because the origins of how the sisterhood came to be and some of the things that they've done coming back to haunt them is potentially going to be really interesting. So I think Lila is not dead. I think that would be a miss for the show. She clearly has received a key piece of information about Valia taking her mother out in order to claim power, and potentially the ripple effect of that within this commune is going to be really interesting. We already get to see that one of the other girls has observed and picked up on this dynamic that it's not about you. It's not about the sisters. It's about the sisterhood. So it's about the structure in place and how many others are experiencing or noticing and feeling those kind of dynamic shifts and differences in whether or not this like organization cares about you, if this is really family or if this is about you being kind of a pawn in their larger structure. And it's cool because the show overall started with the sisterhood being divided ideologically about how things should be run, what steps and decisions they should make, what's ethical and not ethical. We see that Valia and Tula have very clear differences in how they should carry that out. And so there's just so many cracks in like every foundation in every organization that is on the game board right now. And I think which ones will crack first and how will probably be a key factor in this whole thing getting unraveled and how they'll collide with each other. But it's neat to see that the Bene Gesserit is very much vulnerable.
And it's really cool because they hold so much power and sway, and they seem like this almost impossible force just because they're so strong and have amassed all of that power. But the show is showing that everything is not rainbows and sunshine over here. But there are those very real divisions. And I love that we're seeing the pressure from outside and the pressure from inside. And it's just continuing to multiply. And so how will Valia respond when there is so much pressure coming from all of these different places? Because if it's only coming from one side or from one place, you can manage that. But when you're being bombarded by every side, and now she's maybe doubting herself too, I think that makes for some really interesting ingredients for where this show might go next.
Yes, and what's neat about that too is that all of their threads are so interconnected and intertwined with each other that the fate of any one peace or alliance falling or staying stable really affects like the domino effect for all of the other pieces, So this whole concept of a reveal that happens in this episode of the Atreides swordmaster being a mole and working for the resistance, like there's a lot there that potentially could take down the Carino family and the Carino house, which then allows for a pathway for the Rakazi, and then the Rakazi not aligned to Desmond. So there's just like so many like fun conditionals that are happening here, which I think makes for this to be an incredibly unstable structure. But then seeing which ones fall first actually is vital. So I think the next episode will be really fascinating to see all of those different dependencies that everybody has on each other to come through or to reveal information, and when, to whom. It's all so interconnected that any one piece really creates such a ripple effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they are all connected and anybody can mess it up. We got a lot of options here of how this whole thing can come tumbling down.
Yep. Very much so. Very much so. Okay, other big things that we wanted to mention. Time is flying, man. It's crazy. There's so much.
Yeah, I'm also just really curious to learn, well, and we might not learn more, but about this agony process and this like communing with the dead business. I think that's really fascinating, and it plays such a pivotal role in this episode. I'm curious to see if we're going to return to that again, or if that's going to play such a larger role, especially because Dorothea is clearly manipulating stuff from that side of things somehow. I don't know. So I'm really intrigued about that, and I appreciated how all of that was filmed too. It's such a nice contrast to all of the other visuals that we get to see in this episode. So I'm hoping that we return to that portion again.
Mm-hmm. Well, what's interesting too about the agony sequence is there's truths that potentially get dragged out of the past and influence the present, but also the potential unreliability and manipulation of those visions being inaccurate is also an interesting factor, especially for the Bene who are so skilled in mind manipulation that your sense of reality is different. I think that wouldn't put it past them to be still pulling all of those strings and tactics, even in the spiritual realm. So was that Dorothea or not? Was that intentionally sent by someone or something to come to the surface who's a rival of Alia? The kind of there's that concept of there is no truth. The truth is whatever the reality is that's shared and then influencing the present. And so I think that'll be fascinating to see, but it is neat to think about that agony sequence in context of the larger Dune universe. So at the end of Dune episode 2, that whole ceremony that Lady Jessica goes through to become a Reverend Mother, we get to kind of see another way that ceremony is carried out in this show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they've figured out a few things by the time Jessica is doing her business. Yeah. So we got to see the real rough version in Dune Prophecy.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. I will have to say, zooming out on a whole, I was skeptical after episode 1. I was like, it's just, there's a lot happening. I don't know if they can do it. I'm not really jiving with this yet. And here we are, episode 2, and my hopes have significantly increased for the journey that we're about to go on. I am still fascinated to see how we're going to cover a whole lot of ground in the next 4 episodes for a total of 6, because there's so much story to be told here. But this second episode was incredibly strong, so it's really given me lots of hope that we're going to get a real juicy journey.
It's really interesting because I feel like our journeys with this show are so different. I was still hopeful after the first episode, and I didn't love this episode as much.
Interesting.
I think outside of the agony sequence, I was kind of like, all right, this is fine.
Oh.
I think I'm not having a bad time with this show, but it's fine. I'm happy to keep going, but I'm definitely not as invested in this. I'm invested in little pockets of things, but I'm not as into this as I expected to be.
Oh, that is interesting. Our little plot lines on the graph are going in opposite directions. We'll see where we land individually on episode 3.
Mm-hmm.
Yep,
we sure will.
All right. Well, let's give out some TVNS awards, shall we? The first category is for Best Sis. This is given to a character, and a sis can be interpreted however you would like. So we're getting the best of some character. What is your choice?
I want to give it to Dorothea for being just killer in the, I don't know, underworld, afterlife, spiritual realm, whatever. She is just best in people, left and right, and I respect it.
What does she say? You took my future. I'm taking your hope.
It's so good. I was like, yeah, girl, you take that hope.
And just whoosh, sucks her right in.
So easy, too.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure it was it took a lot of preparation to get to this point, but man, ooh, she seized the moment.
Yep. My choice for Best Sis is for Natalia. I think I gave it to Natalia last episode as well. So she's just, I love her.
She's great.
Her proposing to her husband that they use Desmond instead of killing him. I thought that was great.
She's so good in this episode. Man, I'm so curious about her. She's killing it.
Yep. She's got some good conniving brains on her, and I love it. Okay, the next category is Spiciest Moment. What is your choice?
the voice not working on Desmond.
Yep, that was my choice too. Desmond resisting Valia.
Nice.
Oh, it's so satisfying to watch.
Yes.
I was like, oh, dang. Things are about to go down. And the actress that plays Valia does an incredible job doing the like shocked, speechless, there are no words, my mind is being blown, this is terrible face.
And I love that Desmond plays along with it.
Yeah.
And he's like doing the motions, and he is having the best time doing all of this. And it's just so good watching those two spar off with each other in that moment.
Yeah. Very exciting. Very smug. My choice for this is that one as well, which I shared. Okay. Next category is most cutting line. What is your choice?
Yeah, I want to give it to when Jen, not you, the show Jen, says, "Sisterhood above all, not sisters."
Ooh, yeah. Loaded. It's a loaded.
It's so good.
Statement. It's very good. It's very like wise and observant that she's picked up on that, you know, because it's so easy for it to feel like it's the same thing. And she's so perfectly articulated the difference. So good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
My choice for most cutting line is when Natalia Carino says to her husband, "All I'm saying is let's not rush to execute our friends to please our enemies."
Oh, it's so good. Ugh. And the way she delivers that is just perfect.
Yeah, it's so great. Oh, I love it. Okay, looking ahead, what are you excited to see in episode 3?
Yeah, I'm excited to see more of Desmond and more of his chaoticness. I think that'll be really fun to see. And I'm particularly interested in Michaela and her manipulation of the rebellion, and what does that mean, and like what ends are they working toward there. I'm just so fascinated by that decision to manipulate both sides. It's brilliant, obviously, but I'm so curious about how all of those pieces work together in Valia's larger plan. So I hope that we see more of Michaela in particular and learn kind of what she's doing and the goals there as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of complicated stuff happening on so many of these fronts. And interesting, too, that the mole is an Atreides, you know, so there's just some connective tissue that I'm sure they're going to tease out with his character as well. He also has some complicated loyalties now with his new relationship. So there's, unexpected. This is not like a new plot line to shows and whatnot of like, you got your mission and then you got your love, and they sometimes not on the same side. So I think that'll be fascinating to see, to learn about who this character is based on those choices. And is that part of the kind of origin story to the rise of the Atreides house, which we see in full power and force and glory by the time we get to the Dune movies? Who knows?
Well, and I'm also curious about his relationship with Inez, because like she is the path to like power on the throne. And if you know, we know that the Atreides house becomes a big thing. So is that relationship what they're going to exploit to get her on the throne? Or is that going to come from a different location? You know, because Valia, when after the kid died, right? Or I guess it was before, I don't know, whatever. Sometime in the first episode, she like revisits whatever she was revisiting, and it was still through Inez, and the plan was still intact.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering who the new suitor is, and the only one that we've seen so far is Atreides.
Yeah.
So there's probably something there, a brewing, that we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Something there. But then there's also the other sibling, Constantine, and one of the Ricchese daughters that are having kind of their relationship on the side too. And so like, does that fulfill the DNA aspect of bringing these two houses' genetics together? I don't know. But there's information getting traded back and forth that are really influencing the plot. So lots of relationships. Lots of threats.
Lots of relationships, lots of alliances, lots of betrayals.
Yep.
And we're only in episode 2. There's still lots more to come.
Yep. Very much so. All right. Well, this was our review and discussion of episode 2 of Dune Prophecy. You can find it available on Max. Thank you for listening to today's episode of TV and Us. Our name sums it up. We're big fans of TV and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories. So everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you spent time with us today as we continued our journey through Dune Prophecy. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you tune to your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and review. Let us know your thoughts about episode 2. You can connect with us on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok at tvnspod, or email us at tvnspod@gmail.com. We will be back soon to discuss episode 3. We hope you have an amazing week, and we'll talk again with y'all very soon.